Generic greetings and welcome to Science Insanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of science fiction in all its often nonsensical absurdity to you. Today, a battle breakdown, and we're going to be covering the ambush of the ROCINANTE by the Free Navy from Season 6, Episode 3, where Marco Inaros and his flagship the Pella, alongside two armed belter ships, ambush, obviously, and attack the ROCINANTE. And things do not go well when fighting against the main crew and the little Martian warship that could. This video topic was suggested by one of Sci's patrons. Grats, Dave G, you got your pick up on the silver screen. God, that was so pretentious. But first, before we get into it, if you'd like to support Science Insanity, check out our Patreon. Your support is greatly appreciated and goes back into the channel, and if space bucks are short, then like, subscribe, all of that, and share the video around, since every little bit helps. And with that, on to the video proper. However, before we get to the actual battle, let's cover some of the background to why and how it occurred. Heavy spoilers, by the way. By this point in the Expanse, the Free Navy led by Marco Inaros was in open conflict with functionally everyone, because a good politician and statesman, Marco was not. The inner planets, Mars and Earth, were both for the time being putting aside their differences and were working together to hunt down and kill Marco and destroy any of the Free Navy forces and sympathizers that they came across. While at the same time, Belter factions and breakoffs were beginning to push back, as the assassination and theft-happy way Marco rose to power in the Belt left huge swaths of it quite bitter and resentful towards him. Arguably, the crowning moment of his treacherous actions was Ceres Station. A joint task force of UNN and Martian ships were bearing down on the station. Knowing it would have been suicide for his Free Navy to engage them, Marco, aboard the Pella, fled from Ceres Station, taking with him virtually everything and leaving the station with days at most worth of supplies. And while it was a valid tactic to delay and essentially inconvenience the force from Earth and Mars, it's still kind of a terrible thing to do to leave your own people to die. Easy to see why many in the Belt started turning on him. Man was a capital D Johnson when he wanted to be. Of course, while his forces did go along with it, discontent, arguments, and questions as to Marco's leadership began to simmer to the surface. As they were burning away from Ceres Station, the Pella picked up another ship burning opposite, back towards it. Identifying it quickly as the ROCINANTE, Marco decided that they would fight in order to bring some level of propaganda or morale victory to his crew and push all of the doubt and all of the conflict that was rising around him back down. It's important to note that this was most likely an avoidable fight. Marco's ships were running radio silent and relatively stealth. They could and would have been easy to miss if you weren't looking for them, but Marco's hubris and ego wouldn't let him pass up an opportunity to reinforce his greatness and salve his wounded pride. Despite essentially everyone going, "Mark, this is dumb, let's not fight the main characters and die today, please," the decision was made and a fight was going to happen. On the one side, the ROCINANTE, a Corvette-class frigate legitimately salvaged from the Martian Navy, a top-of-the-line warship crewed by our main cast. On the other, three Free Navy ships, a similarly advanced Martian light cruiser of unknown model, and Marco's flagship the Pella. Supporting her were two armed Belter ships, the Granicus and the Lauber. It's important to note the two Belter ships most likely would not have any form of real military sensors and equipment, as they would just have PDCs and torpedoes bolted onto them. This is due to most Belter quote-unquote warships essentially just being armed skiffs and transports that are taken from civilian use. For those less sci-fi inclined, essentially it's the equivalent of a Toyota pickup truck with a machine gun bolted to the back of it. The battle began as the Free Navy fleet reoriented themselves and began a combat burn towards the ROCINANTE, alerting the ship to their presence. Moments later, the crew of the Roci positively identified the ships as belonging to the Free Navy and turned to match burn holding distance as they decided what to do, as they had been caught functionally completely unaware. And now, the actual fighting starts. The first shots of the battle were, however, fired by the three pursuing Free Navy ships, A total of 12 torpedoes fired in volleys of 4 from each vessel streaked towards the Roci. While we don't see the missile tracks on screen, based on the return PDC fire, it's safe to assume that each ship fired its volley on different approach vectors in an attempt to overwhelm the Roci's point defenses from multiple angles. However, like I mentioned at the very beginning, since the main characters are crewing the little Martian warship that could, all 12 torpedoes are successfully intercepted. This is followed by the Roci returning fire with 4 of its own missiles, aimed at the Pella in an attempt to destroy the biggest threat right off the bat. Unfortunately, the Pella's PDCs also managed to track and intercept all of the Roci's munitions, Martian tech on point once again. It was at this point that the crew of the Rocinante realized that they would be both heavily outgunned and outmatched in a prolonged torpedo duel, deciding instead to gamble in an attempt to even the odds. James Holden, diverting power to the railgun, flipped the ship rapidly in a high G 180-degree turn before quickly firing the railgun and rotating back once again to continue their escape burn. Normally, railguns in the Expanse have an effective range of around 1,000-ish kilometers, give or take a few hundred depending on the power and relative movement of the ships. Being significantly outside that, it would normally be almost impossible to hit a competent target that was paying attention. However, instead of targeting the Pella, Holden targeted the smallest ship, the Lauber, little more than an armed skiff. Moments later, the Lauber was gutted from bow to stern as the railgun's slug impacted near dead center on its bow, instantly disabling the ship and ripping its guts out. Now, quick intercept, I have heard a lot of people claim plot armor or writing contrivance that the Roci made this shot, because everything we've seen so far essentially states that it would be almost impossible for this to work. However, I believe 2 factors played into this shot connecting. First, refuge through audacity. The fact the Roci would even attempt this, confusion over what they were doing, or even a moment's hesitation, can and has in real life led to situations similar to this where the impossible happens. Second, Belter ships are notorious for being ramshackle junkers. It's highly possible the computer systems weren't powerful enough or even able to reasonably respond to incoming railgun rounds the way that a proper warship could. By the time the crew would be aware of the railgun round being fired, it may already have been too late for any actions to be taken. Plus, it's just occurred to me that there are very few ships in the Expanse that even have railguns, and most Belter ships would find engaging the ones that do to be borderline suicidal, like taking on the Donager or a Truman-class battleship. So I imagine with the minimal resources, the Belters would decide to skimp on those types of expensive sensors and systems. Regardless, it doesn't matter. Regardless of how or why, the Lauber was put out of commission with that shot. However, rather surprisingly, the ship's reactor didn't go critical, leaving most of the crew injured but alive. This turned out to be a massive tactical advantage, as moments after the Lauber was hit, the second Belter ship, the Granicus, requested permission to render aid. Marco, arrogantly proclaiming that even one-on-one they would still win, agreed, and as soon as he did, the Granicus cut thrust and moved back to render assistance to the stricken vessel, falling out of torpedo range and functionally out of combat as they did. With a single shot, 2 of the 3 Free Navy ships were removed from the fight. And then there was one. In response to losing 2/3 of their fleet, the Pella fires another volley of 4 torpedoes. Despite the smaller number of missiles compared to the first time, they do manage to slip dangerously close to the Rocinante before being intercepted. The resulting explosions, however, and shrapnel damage 2 of the PDCs and render them temporarily inoperable, effectively cutting the Rocinante's point defense grid by 1/3. With the fight now one-on-one and with damage taken, the Rocinante fires its railgun directly at the Pella several times, still outside its maximum effective range. The Pella is easily able to dodge these shots. However, Bobby Draper, the most badass woman in the universe aside from Kamina Drummer, working the ship's weapon systems, notices that the Pella is consistently dodging on the same bearing each time and has an idea. Putting her plan into action, the Roci first fires a volley of 4 torpedoes towards the Pella. vectoring their approach to come from all sides of the ship except the one it had been dodging towards. As the torpedo salvo closes into range of the Pella's defense grid, the Roci fires a heavy burst from its 4 remaining PDCs before spinning one last time to fire its railgun, intentionally aiming slightly off-center of the Free Navy ship. As a result, the Pella found itself functionally corralled. First, the volley of torpedoes streaked in, barely being intercepted in time, before moments later the Roci's railgun slug streaked past the ship, the stress and focus on the known threats blinding the crew of the Pella, and as the ship dodged once again on the same vector away from the railgun rounds, the hundreds of PDC shots fired earlier peppered the Free Navy ship, ripping its bow to shreds and causing heavy internal damage to the ship. However, the size and armoring of the Martian light cruiser was the only thing that stopped this from being the knockout blow, as it prevented the crew from being fully turned to tomato soup and stopped the reactor from role-playing the sun as the PDC rounds ran out of energy before managing to penetrate anything truly critical. I am also, at this point, going to call a nerd intercept on the video to explain something that I had to stop and appreciate, because it's something that you almost never see in sci-fi. This plan worked because it abused the way that sensors and radar works and the way that they track targets. Not only was this a brilliant example of exploiting the way an opponent can get repetitive and cautious while under stress, it also made use of how the advanced sensor systems would necessarily need to filter out background noise to make those things work. In real life, despite what people may think, radar is very capable of seeing through obstructions like trees and even spotting things on the ground like tanks if it's built to do that. It's almost terrifying how there's virtually nowhere to hide from a comprehensive radar network. But a system like that would be almost impossible for your average person to actually use, because it would be returning every tree, every bird, every stray car, and every raindrop. Yes, there are weather radars, that you get the idea. It would basically track everything. So radar systems are programmed to filter out things that are below a certain size, or that actual signals are aimed above a certain altitude, because planes generally don't fly like 20 feet above the ground, or on certain frequencies that will see through things like atmospheric disturbances. And the sensor suites in the Expanse work the exact same way. If ships find themselves in close quarters battle, then those sensor systems will track and display incoming PDC fire or shrapnel or the wreckage of destroyed ships so that they don't become another hazard and the pilot can avoid them. But outside a certain distance, the computer system essentially filters those things out to avoid cluttering the crew's displays. Otherwise, the screen would light up like a bullet hell game every time the enemy fleet fired its cannons at incoming torpedoes. So when the Roci fired its PDCs from so far outside their functional range, the Pella's computers didn't even warn Marco's crew. They didn't even track the PDC rounds as a threat. Fun fact as well, PDCs have safeties to stop the crew from firing them at targets outside effective range and wasting ammo. So Bobby had to disengage the safeties and essentially, I was gonna say manually aim, but the computer still did that. She just had to, you know what? No. Bobby Draper used the Mark I eyeball to snipe the Pella from over 1,000 kilometers away using 4 different guns at the same time because she's just that badass, and nobody will tell me otherwise. The moment that the Pella was struck by the incoming stream of PDC rounds, the ship was almost immediately crippled like I had said. The PDC slugs caused heavy damage to the ship. At first, they shredded the sensor suite and the external hull before gutting the front end of the ship, destroying or damaging the primary control systems, computer conduits and nodes, and killing many of the crew in the ship's CIC. It was a minor miracle that both Marco and his son Philip were able to survive. Due to the relatively small size and energy of the PDC rounds, they didn't have enough power to fully rake the vessel, leaving its engineering rooms, including its reactor and engine assemblies, functional and undamaged. However, it would take time to bring backups online and repair enough of the damage done for the ship to escape the ROCINANTE. Time that was given as Holden opened communication with the stricken Pella, demanding their surrender. Negotiations predictably broke down quickly as Marco refused to surrender, and as tensions rose again, Bobby fired a missile intending to destroy the ship with my all-time favorite saying in any setting, "Ah well, we tried." And as it slammed home, it punched a hole deep into the Pella, and then nothing. It had failed to detonate, as we learned later, due to Holden disarming the warhead. Once again, like, why? With the light damage they'd sustained, the crew of the Roci decided to simply let the ship go. And that is functionally the end of the battle. Now, the aftermath of the battle. We'll start with the ROCINANTE. The ship suffered only superficial damage, 2 of its PDCs being jammed or lightly damaged by shrapnel from the battle. They would be repaired the next time we see them, suggesting it was relatively minor and quick fix. For the Free Navy, it was a total defeat with the loss of vital ships and personnel. The Lauber, the ship hit initially by the Roci's railgun, was totaled, having been damaged to the point of being unrecoverable as well as losing some of its crew. Enraged and indignant at his defeat, Marco ordered the commanding officer of the Lauber to be executed. Bit of a dick move to kill people who are experienced veterans that you can't afford to lose, but it's fine, it is what it is. The Granicus survived intact and undamaged, though down on missiles. It did manage to salvage a repair skiff from the Lauber during its rescue, however. That would be vital for repairing some of the damage to the Pella and making sure that it was space-worthy enough to actually get back to proper facilities to repair it. As for said flagship, the Pella suffered heavy damage, destroying multiple vital components and computers that would be exceedingly difficult for the Free Navy to repair or replace, as well as losing multiple veteran crew, such as the ship's pilot. While the overall damage to the Free Navy was minimal, it was a humiliating defeat for Marco and sowed further discord between him and his son Philip. The boy confronted him in a moment of tension after the battle and claimed that this defeat was Marco's fault, stating correctly that they never needed to be there, that this fight was all Marco's ego. He was correct, of course, and as such was relieved from duty, because nobody questions glorious leader. And with that, this episode of Battle Breakdown comes to an end. Before we fully end off though, a huge thanks to Sci's patrons. David G, the original, Augie, 11 Bravo Crunchy, Terry Higgins, Pedro Munaz, David G, the other one, Silencer, and Vox Apollyon. Thank you all very much for your support. I will now proceed to go play Mechabellum for like 10 hours because I am an addict and this game has been eating my life. Send help. Okay, goodbye.